Good morning and welcome to Deep Dives with New Perspectives. Welcome, Ms. Merrylin LeBlanc.
Oh, thank you, Michael Bartlett. How are you today?
Well, it was funny because I was thinking, we kind of decided on what our topic was today, and I was going in my closet and going, what do I want to wear? And I was like, I want something black or white. And then I was like, oh, I hope Merrylin's going to wear something strongly striped. And here you are.
How psychic you are.
I do have my vertex in the 8th house. So yeah, there's and my Neptune moon in Scorpio. And yeah, I think that's an interesting part with the Scorpio side is, I know we're going to talk about Scorpio and Libra today, of course, but it's one of these interesting things with Scorpio of like, it senses things. It looks like it's just the way the hair is going. So you've got food in my lip or something.
Oh, okay.
It's like, what is that? Right? This thing
What's he looking at? Is he looking at my mouth or his mouth?
No, on my mouth. See, and it's funny, right? So, Scorpio, Lily, no. Scorpio doesn't want to
Lily's your dog.
certain things.
Just to make
right.
it clear.
Exactly. And Libra wants to be pretty inappropriate, right? I always think about Libra as like wanting to be like, one of the things is like, there's this instinctual response to things that are inappropriate.
Okay.
Don't you think when it comes to Libra? Because it's ruled by Venus, and it's like when Venus encounters something it experiences as ugly, it's a very visceral experience for them. Have you ever seen that like on a Libran?
Yeah, but there's that phrase, beauty, or ugly, beautiful or ugliness is in the eye of the beholder. And so talking about Libra or talking about Venus, I think a strong Venus energy does give one a tendency towards classical beauty, a certain amount, a certain elemental balance, perhaps. There's a refinement there that comes in, but some people have a sense of beauty that's very different from that's not Libran at all.
Well, especially if one has, say, maybe Uranus in Libra, or maybe their Venus is in relationship to Uranus or Pluto, or it's this interesting thing. And when these two come together, we've talked about this many times, and it's funny, like I think of the friends that I've had in the past who have strong Libra Scorpio combinations, and I think the Scorpio side's happy accepting the side of Libra, but I think Libra has a really hard time opening itself up and really allowing itself the freedom of what Scorpio allows it to explore.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective on Venus. I would say being a strong Venusian character with Libra rising, yep. and Libra in an air sign, Aquarius. I would say it isn't a hard time. It isn't a hard time exploring that territory. What is difficult about it is exposing to others that one has explored that territory. That therein lies the difference. But it's not like the topic is taboo for somebody with strong Venus energy. And
I don't know. I just find there's some ways that that Libra can be kind of like have an instinctual aversion or reaction to the Scorpionic process. Like, I would never, Scorpio at a certain point in a way, like even though like things are very private, there's a way it isn't remain private, right? There's a way that it involves
the process. But this is interesting. Interesting because here your Venus is in Capricorn, right?
Yes.
Yeah, interesting.
Trining my Pluto, Uranus, Jupiter.
Here we both have, the Venus you're describing. There's the Venus that's very earthy and doesn't really have problems with the
Interesting.
earthly expression of the Taurian thing. And basically, you know, and of course I'm doing self-reflection as you're saying these things, and I'm going, I don't, and I'll give you some things that some stuff that I've gotten into, and this goes back. Oh, I'm changing my screen here. I'm moving around as I'm talking here. This goes back to, you know, using the symbols for degrees and looking at decans and dwads and stuff. And even though, you know, I'm a Libra rising, my Venus is at the end of the first decan of Aquarius, an air sign, which affiliates with that Libra. However, it's at a Taurian dwad. So I tap into that, and I've got 3 planets in Taurus: Mars, Saturn, and Uranus. So I tap into that Taurian energy a lot. So you know, basically, what you're suggesting to me is drawing out an isolation of these signs, which is a good thing, because I think we have to start there. But then what happens when you start blending it with other zodiacal energies and signs? It is a whole, and this is what contributes to our differences. And what basically, you know, drew me to ask you if we could go back into, and I believe you can hear me even as you're dealing with Lily. She must be, is she a Libran or a Taurian or
She's a
or
Leo rising, but she has Mars and Taurus on the midheaven. So of course she's demanding attention.
oh my God, yes. And attention on the physical realm. Like, you can't miss me.
Oh my God, it's so hard. I mean, she even watches me in the shower at night. She sleeps under the blanket. I'm like, and is always touching me throughout the whole night. I mean, it's like she's my love, you know, right now. So
Oh boy. Let's not go there.
not that way. I'm her daddy in a good way.
Okay.
In the appropriate way. Thank you,
Okay,
Libra.
but see how the Scorpio works in one's brain.
Yeah, like
Okay.
so much of that is just so like I don't understand. I mean, I've heard stories and things. Yeah, yeah. Anyway, it's like it's nice that we're talking about this again, because what I loved about our talk is that I've gotten a lot of response from people who've actually been listening and have left comments. You know, they're really appreciating like the way we're talking about this subject, and I don't think people hear much about, you know, the inner workings of the scorpionic process, and like, you know, and the transition of these two. And so of course, I mean, you're like such a great example of being able to do that, because your air signs always have this periscopic effect. I believe it has this ability. Gemini has a little bit of a hard time because it could kind of get caught in the fun house a little bit, but Libra and Aquarius kind of are really seeing other in a new and informed way that requires a little bit of like stepping out of oneself a bit and looking back and seeing how one is acting and how others are acting and how the systems work, especially when you get into Aquarius, where it is really about understanding the synthesis of organization, whether it's one's psychological makeup or society's makeup.
Yeah, that in terms of the air signs, like, you know, Gemini gets too caught up in its own self, whereas the Libra and Aquarius there's a kind of a comparison going on, and it's a sense of it's a sense of the connection that one has with humanity, that, you know, I'm not here alone. And yeah, the Gemini could go off and do its isolated deep thought, but it's limited when it doesn't engage a lot with others, because you're tapping in to what your own humanity. There's one thing, you know, this is not to, we're compartmentalizing, but there's your soul, and then there's the personality that you have as your physical and your physical body, and how that's all getting expressed. And the Libra and the Aquarius recognize that the extent of our individual growth is dependent on the field of humanity that we're involved with, and it's the information process back and forth is extremely important. Sometimes with Gemini energy, I feel like they they want to communicate, they want to put stuff out, but sometimes I have to stop and say, did you, and I know some people that are strongly Gemini, and I have a strong Gemini, I have Jupiter in Gemini, but it's sort of like I'm going, did you really hear what I was saying? I have to say that.
Gemini is in the first quadrant. It's, it's so subjective, but it's like, it's the barest understanding that there is another out there. But when you think of it's the twins, so it's like, it's another, but it's not really other, right?
Yeah, but then there's that rivalry, and they get caught up in the rivalry element instead of transcending that. And let's see what this world is like together as a couple, as a unit of two. But I want to kind of go back to the Mars Venus thing, and in the show we did last week, you started out with your view about commitment, and I mentioned that I disagreed somewhat with it, and I want to explore that, and I want to present a way in which it isn't an either or view either.
I don't think it is either. Yeah. I mean, I hope you know that.
Well, yeah. Well, yeah, but I want to be clear to our audience too about how this goes.
Right.
Okay. So, when we deal with the zodiac, and let's just talk about the natural zodiac to make it simple. We see planets move through the zodiac counterclockwise. Okay. And so when we get to Libra, we're talking about relationships. And then we get to Scorpio, and we're talking about a certain level of committed relationships that are there already.
Right.
But there's another way of looking at the zodiac. And actually, Trish Kennedy and I have been exploring this once a month by looking at the houses. Because, right now, the sun is in the sign of Scorpio, emphasizing last week's topic as well as this week's topic. Now, but it's what we're recording this. We started at 10 o'clock in the morning. And as far as where the sun is right now, even though it's in Scorpio, when it comes to the house systems, and if we're just taking an equal house system kind of thing, it's in the 11th house right now. Unless you're in an extreme part of the world. But, the closer we get to the equator, and even here, I think in Santa Fe, it's in the 11th house right now. And so it will continue through the day, and around 4 o'clock, perhaps 4 o'clock in the no, or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm in the later afternoon. It's going to move into that 8th house first, and then into the 7th house just before sundown. Now we're on standard time, sundown's close to 6 o'clock, and so it'll be into after 6. It's going to move down into the 5th house. So in one respect, we can look at the zodiac from a diurnal perspective, a daily perspective of where the sun is moving, and the sign is moving with it. Okay. So, this afternoon, I would say around 3-ish, we're going to have the sun in Scorpio. It's in Scorpio all day long, but it'll also be in that sign's natural house. So we could look at a time at how that is. I'm just giving the dynamic, but I want to say more about this. And, and then it'll be in the 7th house. And how, what are the differences of Scorpio there as versus, okay. So what happens I think with the 7th, 8th house situation is, and this has changed a lot as we're evolving over time. Because if we go back to, say, our parents' generations and even our grandparents' generation, you know, people looked at, you know, my daughter, my son is of marriageable age and he should have a family. So who would be an appropriate partner for him? And in those early, you know, a century ago generations, it was sort of like, well, that person's the right economic class, the right religious class, the right whatever, you know, kind of thing. I think this would be, I mean, there so many times, you know, there had to be this kind of approval, which is very much a Libran thing. And that's going at it as the zodiac, as a chart goes with the planets moving through it. They move through Libra before they move through Scorpio. You know, in terms of that kind of movement. So it's like looking for the Venusian, Libra Venusian appropriate connection. In some ways, you could say by the time they move into the 8th house, which, you know, because the 7th house is really where there's agreements that being made. You know, there's this kind of, what is the ideal relationship here, whether it's a
Right.
marriage or a business, what is the ideal? So the agreements are being made.
Definitely.
And then you get into the 8th house and you realize that, wait a minute, I can't be intimate with this person. And I'm not talking about necessarily sexual. I'm talking about, can I tell this person my deep, darkest secrets? I can tell my friends my deep, dark, my special friends. And I'm talking about sex even at this point.
No,
Some of
friends
my
that you
deep, dark,
trust deeply.
the
Yeah.
ones I trust, there's a level of trust. So, you know, in earlier generations, some of which we are still connected to through our parents and grandparents, but, you know, it depends on the age. It was like the agreement happened before the trust was developed.
Right.
Now, if we look at it in terms of the diurnal perspective of where the sun and where the planets are thinking, you know, which is more contemporary in our generations growing up, you, well, first of all, the sun moved through in where I mentioned it's in the 11th house now, which is the house of friendships. You know? And then there's the house of, you know, my career, what I do publicly, what people know me for, and what my beliefs are, you know, whether I have a religion or not, or, you know, what culture do I belong to, etc. And then in that cultural context, which is where most people meet, you form these, you have some friends and your friends share certain cultural perspectives with you, or maybe they don't, but they share some common beliefs about people. And so then you get into that 8th house and you share secrets, you share intimate, you might even share, you might, what? You
Secrets.
might, yes. Oh, the secrets.
Yeah.
I'm listening. I'm watching. You might even share sex. And for some people, this may be fine and great, but it's like, I want to get too personal here, but I had a relationship with this guy and the sex was great. So one day he proposes to me. A whole different dynamic. I'm going like, I can't marry you. I have very different goals in life than you do. I don't see, you know, so to me, it's like we can't, you know, we've seen generations, and there's still people who come at the contract, which I think is 7th house. And I wasn't clear on that with you when you You said that, and we come at the contract from having the intimacy and respecting it. I mean, it was like, yeah, what was between us was great, but
That's not going to carry a relationship, buddy.
but in terms, but in terms of a lifelong commitment and what that means, and that's what the social territory goes to. I mean, we still, look at, you could be living with somebody and not have any social contact, and yet you're extremely intimate, you're having sexual relationship, etc. And yet, something happens, one party dies. There is no, unless there is some kind of contract, there's that person can't even, of course, you have to know how to get into hospital rooms, but if you're, so that person has no access. The person that's left behind has no access to you, has no access to your belongings, to things you've shared for maybe years. So in some ways, the commitment, there's a commitment to keep secrets, but the whole range of the commitment has to be solidified by the 7th house. And that can happen after the fact or before the fact. And in prior years, we would see that. I'm also thinking, I did a genealogy for our friend here, tracing, lineage back to Hispanic, like Onate and others. And it dawned on me, so many things that we've been taught by our cultures, our religion, etc. And so many people that originally came here, I mean, the conquistador, they were Catholic for the most part. I mean, there were some Sephardic Jews that also came, etc. But it dawned on me in doing this research that there weren't priests everywhere. There wasn't like, go to the parish priest and let's get married. They weren't. There was no churches in every region or whatever. A minister or a priest, they would be traveling by horseback and coming through periodically. Sometimes you wouldn't see one for a few years or once a year.
Right.
I mean, and then, so it was sort of like people met, like that's traditionally they met and they were going, it's sort of like what we see in some ways, a lot going on. I mean, they're in the early years of the Europeans coming into this country, and I'm not talking about Native American practices at all in this context, just by way of example of what happens first or last. But the settlers, I mean, they saw the attraction and the benefits of being together and so forth. And so, some of them may have written out something, some of them may have just said things verbally to each other. And of course, the legalities of today have gotten way more complex in some ways, I think. I mean, I'm not a student of law.
And yet there's still on some books this idea of what's called a common law marriage, which is what comes from that idea. Is like if you've been together in a way defined, and each state has its own definition of what that means. It's usually like living together, sharing a bank account. There are numerous things that you kind of check off depending on the state that you live in. And that, after 7 years, you can kind of go back and say, hey, we actually were common law, and, I do actually have some rights here. And because otherwise, I mean, it's kind of like what those of us in the gay community experienced during AIDS, and a lot of us experienced, in losing partners or friends, where families who are ultra Christian came in and just basically removed individuals and or their lives from those of us who had been in relationship with them for some time, even though those families' ideals were not in alignment at all with our friends. But we had no rights. That's the thing.
Right. So basically, it's a kind, and Mars and Venus in astrology are looked at as natural partners, whether we're not necessarily talking about male, female, but we could be.
Right.
But we also are just talking about the masculine energy versus the feminine energy.
Anima and animus.
Yeah, and it works both ways. It's like both parties coming together in a relationship can say, I want this relationship, and I accept this relationship. I will accommodate this relationship. And so I'm going, in terms of Libra, Scorpio, 7th house, 8th house. I'm going, there's this, and I, we could do this with the other houses that we couple together in strange ways. There's this kind of symbiosis that's really difficult to say which comes first.
I mean, that's true with all the, I mean, we have to understand that all of these, everything that has to do with astrology, just like in life, is completely cyclical. It's not linear. It's not going from point A to point B. It's coming back to these same things, coming back to understandings and seeing these things in new ways. And so, how do we find this? How do we find new ways and right ways of being in relationship with one another? I mean, that's what kind of we're seeing now at this point in our experience. But we also have this, very Uranian Aquarian way of like meeting people now. It's very almost inhumane. And that's when you talked about Aquarius earlier, there's a way that it has to be a part of humanity, but there's a process through which it always has to go that is apart from humanity. There's a separation. There's a sort of like alienation that's almost chironic in a sense. It's like when I think about Chiron in the old days, I would almost attribute Chiron into the Aquarian myth in a sense, because it's very, it's about finding oneself through the act of being separate from or being in the pain of withoutness, which, being the final air sign, it has to really kind of understand that, right? And it knows that while it wants to go up in that ivory tower and consider things, it really has to also go down and walk amongst the people and experience what life is like. Otherwise, it becomes too fixed. It becomes too ideological.
Yeah, it's Aquarius is often thought of as a group energy, that you want, and just in mundane astrology too, is often looked at as the friendship sign, because Aquarians do want all of those different connections. But there are Aquarians that are extremely kind of, they're so kind of unique and unusual, and they kind of like but there's factors that bring all that information out. I mean, you can find that in some ways, but one of the things, if you were to engage with them, that, well, what is it about you're being off, you're like a hermit or something most of the time, but in their hermit existence, maybe they're reading profusely and bringing in ideas and being very inventive in terms of coming up with maybe some new social structure or mechanical invention, actually, for that matter. But there's a recognition in that process that if all these other people who wrote those books, who invented those contraptions, weren't before me, I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing. And Aquarius recognizes that very strongly.
That's why, I mean, it's so important to look at both the traditional ruler and the modern ruler, because I think it's like, a grounded Aquarian understands that it's building upon that which comes before, and it's not that, and to think out of the box in that relationship to that Uranian ability has, it's like, you're bringing, fundamentally it's lightning, even though we say Zeus, Zeus is the god, it's Jupiter, with lightning, it's really lightning is attributed to Uranus. And so it's like bringing that which is transcendent, that which is way out there, some sort of an archetype out there in the sky, and bringing it down into the earth and embodying it. I think that's why, Aquarians are not, they really do kind of march to the beat of a different, their own inner drum, so to speak, because we have to. It's not, and I think it's hard because people want to put us in certain kind of understandings of it. And it's like there are parts of us that just really aren't about having a definition. That Uranian part is not about being defined.
You're reminding me of, I think it's Paul Wright, who wrote this great book called The Literary Zodiac, about sun signs and authors. And when he wrote about Aquarius, the woman who wrote, the name of the book is not there, but the book, it was about a teacher, and I want to say begins with an S. Anyway, let me just get to the point of it. This teacher who was teaching in an all-girls, very conservative kind of situation where, the families wanted their daughters to just, learn literature, learn music, etc., and then get married to some other wealthy person and marry, the families get married together, etc. And yet the teacher there was a movie even made out about this, I believe. She was very quirky and introduced them to all kinds of different things. It's very progressive in her thought. And Paul writing about it, he says, people wonder, well, there were all kinds of progressive schools at this period as well. She would have fit in beautifully there. Why wasn't she teaching there? And the author is an Aquarius sun sign of this book. And the point is that that would have been too ordinary for her. She wanted to be like the leaven in this field of stagnancy.
Love
to
it.
raise their consciousness, and consequently it was a beautiful example of how Aquarians, you'll find Aquarians in unusual situations, and it's not because they couldn't be with their intelligence or their skill sets, etc., in a group that was similar to them. It's that would be kind of boring, going nowhere.
Preaching to the choir.
Yeah, preaching to the choir.
How boring.
Where's the evolutionary
right
excitement
excitement
and potential and
potentiality? That's a good one too. Yeah.
Yeah.
We totally switched off to a couple different signs though. I'm up to Aquarius, but
yeah, but no, it's just a sense of advancement and of raising. It's an example too of raising the field of humanity. Like how do we get, the citizens, the voters of the United States let's take the gun issue, because I don't think that's so like politically divided. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't in terms of parties. But how I keep asking, how did the Australians get to that point of banning guns and turning in their guns? And what are the differences? And so the Aquarian in me is like, okay, where's the what kind of leaven, this is a metaphor, what kind of leaven is needed in this country to change things? And it basically, I saw, it was 60 Minutes this past week. They had a thing about a town in, maybe it's Arkansas, maybe, where they have this new law that the police officers, the sheriffs, etc., aren't prosecuting or arresting people because they don't want to get entangled in this law. They think that they're not against having guns, but the new law is making it almost impossible for them to deal with people who are violating the use of guns in inappropriate ways. And so it's kind of interesting because it's sort of like our consciousness is here, a mass consciousness in this country, it's been kind of divided, pro guns, against guns. And I mean that in the sense of the kinds of guns. I mean, I would never have a gun, and I'm not against people having guns, but for what purpose and for what kind is my thing. Because I just think the whole Second Amendment thing has been misinterpreted by our Supreme Courts and some people, as far as I'm going. We don't need a militia at home anymore. We have the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, Marines, etc. We don't need people to defend themselves in that way. But yes, you could go hunting and you can get a license and go get your food, your share of meat for the
Do
year.
you really need an AK-47?
No, don't need one, etc. But I mean, I'm trying to give an example of the Aquarian field of consciousness. It's sort of like looking for, there's the choir, and we know the choir. And unfortunately, most of the time we end up preaching to the choir because it's hard to find what that piece is and where you can insert that piece to change the thinking of others. And interestingly, like, well, Obama was a Leo, the opposite of Aquarius, although I think it was an Aquarius rising or something. So there was a potential there for raising the consciousness. And there were, at least we got the health.
Think of those are all the early banners. I mean, that's usually, that's usually speaks to someone's rising sign, right? Hope,
Right.
change, and
Right.
that's all Aquarian.
Is Biden a Libra rising? I know he's Scorpio sun and it's in the 12th house. I don't remember if the rising is.
I think he's Sag rising.
No, because he's a Scorpio sun and it's in the 12th house, so he can't be Sag rising. That would be in the 11th house. Or no, wait a minute. No, that would be, you're right, Sagittarius. See, because of doing this reverse thing, I sometimes reverse the.
Right, that's the hard, yeah. I mean, yeah, and because it's good that you brought that up earlier because I didn't think about that before. But yeah, I'm 12th house Scorpio, so it automatically I'm always like the person's either Scorpio rising or Sagittarius rising. So.
Oh yeah, he's like you.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Right.
I think he's Aquarius sun.
Right. And Scorpio is a sign that's caught in the middle between Aquarius and its opposite sign, Leo. So, in some ways, he can see what needs to be done.
Well, it's like you said, I like the word that you brought up last week too, because it's such a crucial word when it comes to Scorpios. It's about surrender, right? There's sometimes like, you can push, and it's that Mars. It's not the same Mars that's in Aries. It's not as instinctual because it's gone through some development. It still has that desire nature, but it starts to learn the cost of what desire is. And sometimes the best thing that you can do, and the hardest thing for Mars to do, is either to wait, to stop, or to actually remove itself, not to interject.
Yeah.
And Scorpio, I think, really has that benefit. And I think especially after when you think developmentally, I mean, I'm thinking in the opposite direction, going from Libra to Scorpio, there's a way that, that Libra also educates Scorpio. So Scorpio doesn't, otherwise I think Scorpio would just be like all of our icky stuff inside in a way, otherwise it's like this part of like that wouldn't be trying to integrate itself.
Well, yeah, yes. Because often, Scorpio doesn't, Scorpio's, I think, a bit fearful of actually going into that self-exploratory realm. Hey there's beautiful Lily. She's telling us it's time. You guys have been talking too much. Well, she says it's my turn. It's my time.
Exactly. Just here I am. Love me, everyone. Oh my gosh.
So Michael, yeah, where can you be found?
I can be found at CoreMichael, CoreMichael.com. What about you, Merrylin? Where can people find you?
Merrylin LeBlanc, and that's Merry, like Merry Christmas. Merrylin, LeBlanc, LeBlanc. But that's not, I can't, that's my name. You can find me at Moonwise, and that's spelled normally like moon and wise, but all one word. Moonwise at astrology, Moonwise astrology at, oh God, that's an email.
MoonwiseAstrology.com.
Astrology.com. Merrylin LeBlanc at gmail.com. Wow. Okay, here we go.
Thank you all. And if you guys are liking what we're doing, please hit subscribe, hit like, share with your friends. Thank you for those of you who recently joined us. Thank you for your comments. I'm glad you guys are enjoying our in-depth exploration of Scorpio. There's something about Scorpio this year I think that deserves a little more exploration. So I'm glad we're doing this.
There's so much energy right now, especially there. All right. Bye for now.
Take care. Bye.